all of my trials. I cannot bear my burdens alone. In my distress, He kindly will help me. He always loves and cares for His own. I must tell Jesus, I must tell Jesus, I cannot bear my burdens alone. I must tell Jesus, I must tell Jesus. Jesus will help me, Jesus alone. I must tell Jesus all of my troubles. He is a kind and compassionate friend. If I but ask Him, He will deliver and make all my troubles quickly end. And I must tell Jesus, I must tell Jesus, I cannot bear my burdens alone. I must tell Jesus, I must tell Jesus. Jesus will help me, and Jesus alone. Tempted and tried, I need a great Savior, one who can help my burdens to bear. I must tell Jesus, oh, I must tell Jesus. He all my cares and sorrows will share. Sing it with me. Oh, I must tell Jesus, I must tell Jesus, I cannot bear my burdens alone. Oh, I must tell Jesus, I must tell Jesus. Jesus will help me, Jesus alone. Amen. Praise the Lord.
Anybody else? Brother Tony, you want to sing? No. I'd love to. He's nice. But you know what I was thinking when you were leading the singing? I like to sing and I can't. And I looked out and over half of you don't sing anymore when the congregational songs are being sung. And I think that's very sad. Yes, it is. I think we need to pick it up. You agree? Yes. Because if I sing, you don't have to outdo anybody. But I think a healthy song service from the pew really helps to lift the service and the worship. So anyway, if you'll put that into your memo, and we got such good singing, and when the song leader is singing and leading us, there ought to be a robust sound come out of those pews. I think it'll make a difference, and I think God will be pleased with it. Okay, with that said, Brother George is going to come and share his devotion. George, you want the lapel mic, or do you want to use this mic? This one, okay. All right, let's pray for George.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll just use this mic. That way when I pass out on the floor up here, you won't hear me hit. So after hearing Justin sing that song, I was sitting there and I thought, George, what you've got to say just seems like it's going to be so small compared to what those words said. I must tell Jesus. But I think, and the Lord told me, he said, well, you've thought about what you're going to say, and I approved of it, and it's going to go along with it, even though I don't think it will. You forgive me. I can see you good, but I can't see this. If I put these on, I can see this, but I can't see you. So if I get my nose down here on my notes, you forgive me. It's nice to have a Bible that you can put in your pocket and get 2,700 different translations and everything else on it, except when you need it, and then it takes a half hour for it to get started. So anyway, last week Iva spoke, so you ought to know that it was going to be my turn pretty quick. I didn't know it was going to be this week because Tony said, well, we're going to wrap up our devotional services and get back to regular Wednesday night services. Last evening, he called me and he says, since I've had it last week, you got something going on. Said, I've been busy and I haven't had time to get something for a devotion. And I said, well, yeah, I've been rolling around for a long time. Iva wrote hers last week when he asked Tuesday night. I wrote mine Wednesday while she was gone. I didn't know, and she does not know, that what we wrote are compatible. I could have got up last week right behind her and took right off where she left off. So as a little refresher course, how many remember what Iva said last week? Pardon? Yeah, Habakkuk, one of those guys, yeah. She said something that I think all of us have said. You might remember what she said. She said, Lord, do you remember who I am? I'm Ivor Bailey. I live at, 8121 across the street, Briggs Road, crossing the church, Lord. My phone number such and such and such. Do you remember who I am? Well, that's basically about what I want to talk about a little bit. If what I'm going to talk about is silence, not hearing. After Brother Sherm led the singing and Justin had that nice song, and Brother Tony introduced me and you sang and you gave your tithes and offerings, what would you say, what would you think if I just got up here and did absolutely nothing, said nothing, just complete silence, just stood here? You'd probably start thinking after a little while, say, what's wrong with him? Aren't you going to say anything? I can't hear him. Did he say something? And after a little while, you say, come on, George, we sang our songs. We're sitting attentive in the pew. We gave our tithes and our offering. We got things to do, places to go. Will you say what you're going to say so we can get on with what we want to do? Nope, I'm just going to stand here. Well, Brother Bailey, how long are you going to stand there? 400 years. Yeah, 400 years. That's what I want to talk a little bit about. 400 years of silence. When I did the Christmas play, was writing it, it was easy to get a sketch and an outline from Genesis in the Old Testament through the last prophet Malachi. It's all there. It's all laid out, the timelines, who, what, when, where. And it was easy to pick it all up, and that's what we projected. The story of Christ's birth, it's all laid out in the New Testament, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. It's all right there. That was easy. But someplace, and in my mind, I think it was nighttime, because I spend a lot of time, like a lot of other old people, can't sleep. So you get up, you sit in your rocking chair, and you look out the window in complete darkness. Maybe you get a cup of coffee, and you just sit there, and you think. And you think about scriptures, and you think about God, and you think about you, and you think about a lot of stuff. And my mind went to, what in the world would people do? And I tried to get in my mind, what did they do, the Israelites, in 400 years that they never heard a word from God? What would you do? What would be your reaction when I stood here and said, I'm not going to say anything for 400 years. I lived that long. And your great, 20 generations down the road was sitting where you're sitting, and I finally said something to them. What would they think? What would go through their minds? Well, in that 400 years, just to give you a brief idea of what happened, when God doesn't speak, man does. So in 400 years, they wrote books. They wrote a lot of books. They wrote what they called the Apocrypha, if I pronounced that right. And those books contained a lot of things that weren't God-inspired. They wrote about, well, the book of Judith, the book of Esther. The Maccabees wrote about the history. There was a lot of books written and a lot of scriptures put in the scriptures that God had set up and gave them from the old prophecy. for 1,000 years, from David, Psalms, right on through, they added things to that. And when they added to that, it made a lot of confusion. Out of that came the Pharisees and the Sadducees. They couldn't get along. Out of that came a millennial teaching, a rapture teaching, all kinds of just God didn't put it in there. They did. Besides, on top of that, in that 400 years, there was Babylon, the Assyrians, the Greeks, the Romans, all with their books and their laws and their religions, all put on the people of God. In my mind, I could see a complete confusion, a complete chaos, noise, if you please, just noise, this and that, and noise in their heads, and the teachings and the prophecies and the regulations and the laws that they put on them. We read about them in the New Testament, that you couldn't go to the temple of Fish, you couldn't do that, you couldn't go here, you couldn't carry this, couldn't get your mule out of the ditch, you can't eat wheat on Sunday, just all kinds of stuff. And I thought, well, yeah, but then again, what's that got to do with what I'm thinking about, this 400 years of thing? And God made it pretty simple to me. He said, well, what happened at the end of the 400 years? I said, well, it's pretty simple. I said, you go to the Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, they'll tell you all about Jesus being born. He says, yes, but there was something happened just before that. And I never caught it until I thought about it. What was it that happened before Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John wrote all about Jesus, the birth, everything that happened, the angels, the star in the sky, the shepherds? Well, there was a man named Zachariah and his wife Elizabeth, and the scripture said that they were righteous before God, and he worked in the temple. He was a priest. His job was to do the incense thing, as we portrayed here. And we know that the incense thing is the prayers, and the prayers of the saints, and the altars of the incense. In Luke, the first chapter, as we read it, and you go down through it, and it tells about Zachariah and Elizabeth and all their things, and how he carried out the thing, his duties in the temple. And we get down to where Zacharias is in a place of silence. And all this noise for the last 400 years, all these laws, all these regulations, all these languages, and all these bondages and the wars and the separation and the divisions, he knew that. He'd been taught that. But in his place of silence, he looked up, and while they all said a horde of people, just hundreds of people were outside praying, making all kind of noise. He was inside, separated. And he looked up, and there stood a man. And it sort of set him back. There's nobody supposed to be in there except him. The man spoke to him. That made it a little worse, because he said, oh, nobody's supposed to talk in here. Who are you? And the man said, I'm Gabriel. He said, I stand before God, and God has sent me to tell you something. In my mind, I had seen Zechariah thinking about what the last prophet said. Malachi said, in that day I will send complete destruction. I will make you dust. I will destroy your buildings, your temple, and scatter you. I'm sure that man was scared to death because this is the end. This is what the scriptures was talking about. I don't know why he's telling me this. Am I supposed to go out and spread this like Jonah did to Nineveh? Am I supposed to be the one that spreads the news to all the world that it's the end, this is it, this is all there is to it? But in all that confusion, when that angel stood there before him, and all he said was, in the silence, Zechariah. That's all he said. Well, who are you? Why have you here? Why did you come? God sent me. Why? Well, he heard you and Elizabeth praying. What? And you and Elizabeth are going to have a son. I sort of thought, now what a way to introduce what the New Testament, the coming of the Messiah, the plan of salvation was to tell an old man and an old woman, because they prayed, he's going to have a baby boy. He didn't go in to tell him what John was going to do or who he was going to be. He just said, you're going to have a baby boy. At that, of course, Zechariah was ecstatic. Didn't know what to do. Well, I'm happy, up and down. And then he told him what was going to happen. I would have been the same as Zechariah. I would have said, what? I don't believe you. This is not going to happen. I am old. Elizabeth's old. And the angel said, well, believe this. You're not going to say anything. Silence once again. In my mind, I could see this old man when he came out, and everybody was outside and praying for him. Said, what happened in there? We were worried about you, because we know and we understand if in a certain time that priest wasn't back out, they had a rope around his leg and they drug him out because they thought for sure he'd done something wrong, and God struck him dead. But he come walking out. But he couldn't tell him what the angel said. Couldn't tell him what Gabriel said. Well, what'd they say? Huh? That's all it says about it. They couldn't tell him. I suppose he had to, make all these motions. The next thing he had to do, after he served his purpose there at the temple, he had to go home, tell his wife. Says what? In my mind, the coming of the Messiah was this old man and this old woman trying to figure out what, Zachariah was trying to say. So, he said he got pencil and paper and told all the rest of them when he was born. His name is John. But he didn't tell them anything else about it. He just said his name's John. And he began to speak again. But what astonished me the most was Zechariah was in a place that was silent and quiet. 400 years, and the first man that God spoke to was somebody that prayed. And I thought, well, that's pretty simple. If we want to get God's attention, instead of all this noise and all this going on, all we got to do is be quiet, take our petition to God, and wait. A little while later, he went to Mary. Gabriel went to Mary. He didn't tell her that she was going to have a son right off. He says, "Hail, Mary, thou favored of God." A whole different scenario. Now, that's the way to announce the Savior coming. not to announce the forerunner of Christ as, hey, old man, you're going to have a baby. I thought, well, what's that got to do with me? How do I fit in Zechariah and all this other stuff? When he says you live in a world that's full of noise and confusion, do you remember the one Sunday afternoon about, I don't know, 40-some years ago, about this time, her and I was sitting at a pew. God's acres, a lot of people, a lot of noise, a lot of going on. And in my heart and soul, George, come to me. That's all it took. A little while later, I understood. And we got saved. Right in the noise, right in the midst of political uprising. And today we've got Russia and China and North Korea and A-bombs and missiles and threats and the LBGT and whatever, and human rights and gun control and the border and crime and death and everything around us. And it's noise, it's world noise, it's man-made world noise. But right in the midst of it all, do you hear Sherm, Evelyn, Tony? Can you hear it? Or are we in a quiet place where we hear Justin, Jeff, Iva? Do we hear it? Can we hear our name? Right in the midst of all this noise. Zechariah was in a place just like this. Zechariah was doing what the Lord and all his family had done. To imagine 400 years, I looked it up. That's 20 generations. My family, Bailey family, on September 15th, 1620, he died in Virginia. Now, that's a long time ago. And he came from England, and I am taken for granted that he fled under the Great Migration to get away from the Church of England to come here. Another Bailey, 1635, landed at Plymouth, Massachusetts. We've been here a long time. There's a lot of stuff that's happened. I don't know what they did. I really don't know their true religion. I'm thinking that they were Huguenots. They might have been Puritans, probably Puritans. But here I stand, 400 years later. I heard the same voice they heard. The guy's name was Thomas Bailey. Thomas. Go to the Americas. What? Get on a boat and go to the Americas? Why? 400 years, one of your great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandsons is going to stand before a few people in a congregation in Newark, Ohio, and tell them that God loves them. Tell them that God answers prayer the same as he answered Zechariah and Elizabeth. They were no different than you folks. You got kids. You got family. We all know somebody. What's the only word that he used to describe the influence of a whole new concept in religion? Well, me and old Elizabeth, we prayed. And we know what changed the whole world. I don't believe they lived very long. I don't think they lived long enough to know what that man did. I don't think they lived long enough to see him in the wilderness, dressed in camel hairs and hair and bushy and whatever he did, and to stand in front of the most elite people in the world. And as Brother Tony brought out the other morning, you snakes, you Pharisees, don't you know you're out of the will of God? I don't know whether any of us will ever live long enough to see some of these kids over here become what, maybe John did, preachers. Iva's mother prayed for her family for 70 years. She never seen them all saved. But there's one thing that Elizabeth and Zachariah and her mother, and you can name names, and we can be here all night, that they definitely know for absolute certainty God answers prayer. Even through the confusion, even through the darkness, he's there, whether we know it or not. When Iva says, Lord, do you know I'm here? It's me. And we've all said that. We've all been there. Just, God, where are you? These people are sick. And are they ever going to get well? We prayed for Sister Sarah for almost 2 years. How many others? We prayed for Sister Donna. We don't know what God's plan is for tomorrow, but we know one thing for sure. God answers prayer because, well, the Bible says it did over and over and over. He delivered Moses, the Israelites, Daniel, David, the three Hebrews. You pick out a name and put it in the Bible, and God dealt with them. You pick out a name sitting here in this congregation, and I'll absolutely say, God dealt with you and was honest and was true to your soul when he mentioned David, Bob, Tony, George. Still small voice in a place where it's quiet changes the world. To wrap it all up, to end what I'm going to say, never give up. Pray. Never let go of that incense that Zachariah had. Never walk away from that altar of incense until you're completely satisfied with your prayers. That you can know through all the confusion, God heard me. We've got a long way to go. God lets us live for another few years. I don't know what tomorrow brings. But I'll ask you to do this. When you get down before God, George, mention my name. Mention her name. As we look through the pews, and a lot of them, are empty tonight, but Sunday they were pretty filled. If you know to somebody that's sat in these pews and those pews and these pews, we should not leave here tonight till we go before God and say, No, I can't remember all their names. Johnny White. The woman that was prayed for cancer. Zimzax. That's all it takes. Mention a name. Spend some time. We rush and we go fast. We want to go home. I'm tired. Shut up, George. Sit down. Okay. But before I go, I want to mention your name. Church of God. Children. Beloved. That's all.
God always had somebody at the right place in the right time. And he always had somebody to carry on the plan all the way through. And George makes a good point tonight when you stop and think about the names that are mentioned in every service and the people that are sick and the people that are having surgery and the people that have this kind of burden and that kind of burden. And it would be nice to lock some of those names in our minds when they're being mentioned throughout the service, or like the man that got saved after the service, Tammy West's husband, Barthel. He got saved. That's the first time he's been in church in a long, long time. And if we can take those names with us when we leave the service and periodically through the week or before you go to bed that same night or whatever, bring that name to the Lord. Nobody knows about it except you and the Lord. And you whisper that name. I believe God will answer prayer like that. And yet we have so much on our minds and so many things to do and so many places to go. It's like we forget everything that went on in the service from week to week. But it'd be nice if we would start being a little conscious of some of these people. And we may not know, but there are people in every service who are really burdened. And they really got needs. They really got heartaches. And they don't know it, but if they knew it, they would really appreciate their name being lifted up before the Lord. So let's try to focus on that part as well and try to remember some of these names and bring them to the Lord in prayer. Because prayer is probably the most effective weapon that the church has today. The effectual, fervent prayer of a righteous man will avail much. It's amazing. So thank you, Brother George. With that said, I need to mention something this evening. Gabriel Yance called me. As you know, he and his wife a few months ago came home and their 18-year-old son had hung himself. And she's never recovered from that. And she has a lot of burdens. And she just comes home and goes into her room and sleeps. But there's a lot more weight that's added to that situation, which I'm not allowed to mention. But Gabriel is also learning to become a loan officer at the Fifth Third Bank, and he's got a lot of classes and a lot of traveling to do. And his wife is in a very dire situation, and they're struggling to hold things together. And he called me and he asked me if I could do him a favor. And what he wanted was to see if he could find a couple people. He's going to sell the frontage, the acre and a third. That's his house, the driveway, what's right on North Vernon. And he's going to keep the remaining 13 acres. And he's going to build a double wide. And this is a plan. And he needs to pay off the mortgage. And he's a very good with his handling his finances. And wants to buy a double wide. And it's going to be downsizing. And his wife works at a school in Pickerington, and she's got a lot on her. And a couple teachers got punched in the head by the students at different days, and then someone else had committed suicide, and it rekindled a lot of pain. And I can't say much more, but she's the family is under load, and all he was asking for was a couple people, young kids maybe, to come, and he's got to get this property sold, and all that he needed was a couple people to come and do some boxing and maybe some just putting stuff in boxes and getting his house ready to put on the market. And then we talked about other burdens and stuff like that, and what a struggle it has been. It's still a difficult time. So I said, well, and he wanted to pay some of the young people. And just let me throw this in. Bridget up there at Watts has taken over for Andrew. She's the manager of the restaurant. And she mentioned to me that she'll be able to pay waitresses $17 an hour, and anybody that wants a bus, 16 hours an hour. So if you want to make some money, that's pretty good money. But anyway, he said, I'll pay the kids whatever. And I said, well, let me talk to the church on Wednesday, and we might be able to do something better. And the situation, I can't go into all the critical details, but I said, I'll talk to the congregation. We have a ministry that we call Helping Hands, and what I'll do is talk to them and see, and maybe we can make a really difficult job easy. And what he's got is a medium-sized basement, and he needs to get it sold. He needs the walls painted white. He's got all the paint. and it's 3 walls basically, and then he's got a lot of boxing to do. And so I'll talk to him and see what the church has to say. And I'm for one on board with that. I'll get my studies in line so I can be there. But if we can get 10 people with paintbrushes, no, rollers and maybe some paintbrushes and maybe your own paint pan, we could make a 2 or 3 day job go away in just a matter of a few hours if there's 10 or 15 of us. And he lives right up the street. He has been a tremendous neighbor. He's preached for us on different occasions. He watches our property like a hawk. He has chased so many mischief people off of this property. And anytime he sees anything going on, he gets on his truck and gets right after him. Things have slowed down since we built the fence. So it was my suggestion, not his. And he broke down. We had prayer. And I said, well, I'll see what we can do. You've been a good neighbor. And maybe, and it can be women too, that if you can box, just put things in boxes. He's got everything. No trim work. And that's a dream for any painter. And he wanted to know, if he wanted to pay. I said, well, you got enough on your plate right now. I'll see what the church can do. And it's an opportunity. And so I'm talking to you and asking if any of you could be there. I said, what would be the best time? He said about 10 o'clock on Saturday morning. I said, okay, I'll talk to everybody and see what we can do. And I thought it would be nice if we could give a couple hours and rollers in a basement that's a medium size. And if you had enough painters, it wouldn't take too long, especially with no trim work. And I know he would appreciate. This Saturday. Oh, that's the, oh yeah, and all the kids will be here, huh? What if we move it to after the kids are here? Or do we have enough people that could still do it if we had we're gonna have the thing? It don't have to be at 10. I could move it out after. When do the kids finally eat lunch and leave? About 1 o'clock? Is that right, Mary? Mary here?
Probably over by 1. There'll just be some cleanup.
Shall probably be over by 1?
Yeah, there'll just be some cleanup to do.
And mostly that involves what? Fathers and mothers of the kids that are here. And of course you have lunch, right? So maybe if we can move it to 1 or 2. I don't think the time will be a major issue with him. So why don't we just leave it this way? I don't know how many of you will be able to help out. But those that can come at 10, who are not normally at the Easter egg hunt, and then those of you that can come at 1 or 1:30. And that would probably be the best way to do this. So I'll give you the option, either 10 o'clock or 1:30. Or if you play it smart, come over here and have lunch and then go over there. Yeah, how's that? Hot dogs, they never taste better than when somebody else cooks them. So come and have lunch, and you only have to walk up the street 100 yards, and you'll be at his house. It's the brick front. And so how many of you think you could make one of those 2 times for maybe a couple hours? And I'll tell you, if we have 10 people, we can knock it out. Okay, let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, myself 7, 8 in the vestibule. 8, okay, 8 people. That's a good start. Yeah, oh yeah, at 10 o'clock or 1:30. Okay, that's 9. Yeah, and if we can have 10 people, and anybody can box, so, and not everybody can paint, but you don't have to trim, so you got no barriers or guidelines. Just slap it on the roller and let her fly. Yeah, okay. Yeah, and we'll get a lot done. And I'll be there. Gabe will be there. Randy will be there. I'm picking them out now as I go. And everybody can put something into a box. And he'll tape them up after that. And I know it'll mean a lot to him. I wish I could tell you the full story, and it's heartbreaking. Yeah. Yeah. And I meant to go too, but I was out of town for some good reason, but I don't remember. But go ahead.
Four or five rows from the front, and him and his wife and his kids were sitting there, and his son that died was in the casket.
Right.
And an image that I'll never forget is seeing Gabriel, as we were singing a song, standing with both his arms raised and praising God. And just a few feet away in front of him was his son. I think he was maybe, 19 or 20, laying in the casket.
18, I think.
18.
I think. I'm not sure, but I think it's 18.
And we had breakfast, I don't know, about a week or a couple weeks after that. And we had a good talk, and he had mentioned his wife. And just, if we could put ourselves in our brother's shoes and just do our best to try to understand the grief and the pain and the burden that they're going through. And the scripture comes to mind, bear ye one another's burdens, and so fulfill the law of Christ. Amen. And so what a great opportunity to be able to help him out and his wife.
I can tell you the situation is worse than what he's already said.
Absolutely.
And otherwise, he might be able to tackle it on his own. But the situation is critical. And he needs help.
Yeah.
And his wife can't even function. And it's critical. You just take my word for it. He's really he really needs help.
Let's remember him in prayer too. And his wife.
So 10 o'clock, and I'll be there. And if there's anybody else that you can bring, if any of you young people can get away, after it'd be the younger kids, right, doing the Easter egg hunt. Mary, maybe you can talk to wherever Mary is, you can talk to some of the kids to see if they can get away, because they can box. It would make a big difference. So that's the situation. It's just a lot more critical. It's not like he's just going to get the church to help him. That wasn't even his suggestion. He wanted to pay for it. So I thought I'd bring that to you. And I know that our church will rise for the occasion, and it will be a lot of help. And it might win him. You never know. I mean, he goes to church. He's got his church. And you never know. So with that said, 10 o'clock, and then maybe have lunch here and then go over when you're done with lunch. 12:30, whatever. If you want to get a little earlier start, however it works out for you. All right, thank you. And thank you for raising your hand, those of you that did. And pass the word out. And put it on Facebook, if you will, and see if you can't get some helpers. Bring your kids, and they can pack a box. All right, and then Lord willing, I'll be preaching Sunday morning, and we've had some really good services and good attendance. We've had a lot of fun, and appreciate Ben, his wife, Bobby Joe, and some of their kids were here, and then Davis, is that his name, the choir director? What's his name? Mike? Bishop Schwartzy's. Mike is his name? Lewis, yeah. And then some, I think, of Beverly's girls were here too. So it was a nice service. All right. You're all dismissed. If you got any questions, give me a call. And I hope in time I could put an ending on this, a good ending. So I can't say anything now. All right, thank you.